What if everything we've ever believed about the Watchers was just a veil? From ancient legends to viral videos with millions of views, the image of the Watchers is often wrapped in a romantic tragedy. Love-struck angels seduced by earthly beauty who fell from the heavens for love. It's a gripping tale, a forgivable tragedy. But what if that's only part of the truth, and the rest has never been told? What if the fall didn't begin with emotion, but with a conscious decision, a conspiracy against the covenant? In the Book of Enoch, we're told of seduction, of desire, and of biological consequences, the Nephilim, giants who ravaged the earth. But in another ancient text, one excluded from the Bible, the story takes a drastically different turn. That text is the Book of Jubilees. Stripping away all romanticism, Jubilees portrays the Watchers not as helpless victims of passion, but as beings fully aware of what they were doing, deliberately forming an unholy pact, determined to pass on forbidden knowledge, disrupt sacred rhythms, and interfere with humanity's divine timeline. This wasn't an emotional stumble. It was a theologically organized rebellion. And if that is true, then we may have misunderstood the very nature of the event from the beginning, misunderstood the premise, misplaced our sympathy on those who deserve judgment, and ignored a text that lays out the chilling full picture, but was silenced and buried. The Book of Jubilees doesn't embellish. It clarifies. It doesn't deny Enoch. It goes further than Enoch. It doesn't aim to stir emotions. It comes to warn of a truth that's hard to accept, that sometimes the most dangerous threat isn't a careless fall, but a calculated betrayal. If that's true, do you still want to believe the old story, or are you ready to reopen a long-buried book and begin to see everything in a wholly different order? For centuries, we've been told one version of the story, that there were angels called Watchers, heavenly observers, who fell in love with human women. They were love-struck, married them, and bore giant offspring, the Nephilim, plunging the world into chaos. That is the story of the Book of Enoch, an ancient mythic text passed down from early Jewish tradition and referenced in numerous extra-biblical writings. But what if this is only one account, and there exists another, offering an entirely different explanation of the same event? In the Book of Jubilees, a book removed from nearly every modern Bible but preserved in Ethiopian tradition, the Watchers are not victims of love. They are divine beings with a clear intent from the beginning, to betray the covenant, to teach mankind what they were not yet meant to know, to disrupt sacred cycles, and to introduce magic, metallurgy, cosmetics, warfare, and divination, not out of love, but for the purpose of manipulating humanity and dismantling divine order. This difference isn't a mere detail. It is a theological depth. If you believe Enoch's version, you might find it easy to sympathize. They were at fault, but tragically so. But if you read Jubilees, you'll feel a chill, because this is no longer about hearts. It's about structure, a sophisticated, organized conspiracy, sealed with an oath among powerful beings to destroy the sacred foundation, keeping humanity in alignment with the covenant. Two accounts, the same event, but two entirely different natures. So, which one is the truth? Perhaps Enoch captured the outward emotion, while Jubilees revealed the internal cause. Perhaps both are right, but only when viewed side by side can you grasp the full depth of that event. And maybe, Comparing the two narratives is the very first act in re-examining our spiritual history, not with romantic eyes, but with awakened, discerning vision. Because sometimes the betrayer doesn't wear a black cloak, but comes clothed in light with a moving story to conceal the intent to erase the sacred from within. The Book of Enoch, also known as 1 Enoch, has long been considered the earliest record of one of the most mysterious and controversial events in all of biblical tradition, the rebellion of the angels. In it, we are told that 200 beings called Watchers, guardians from heaven, abandoned their sacred station and descended to earth, where they saw the beauty of human women and could not resist. They loved, they married, and they bore children, the Nephilim, a species unlike any other, possessing destructive power that shattered the balance of the world. Because of this illicit union, God intervened, chaining the Watchers in the abyss of darkness and cleansing the world with a great flood. The story in Enoch is memorable. It's filled with tragedy and love, the kind that draws human sympathy. The Watchers aren't portrayed as demons. They are weak. They made a wrong choice, but in a moment where their hearts cried out. And that's why this story has become so widespread, shared across thousands of videos, forums, and podcasts. Many consider Enoch a complete explanation for Genesis 6, which only briefly mentions that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. No one can deny the influence of the Book of Enoch. It has inspired art, pop culture, and even ancient alien theories. With its vivid cinematic narrative, many believe it to be the full truth, or at least the most honest of the forbidden texts. But here's the thing. Enoch is largely a vision, a personal account from a man taken to the heavens who saw what occurred in the higher realms and was told to write down what he had seen. Yet the question remains, was what he saw the whole truth? Because Enoch describes the external side of the event. It's like a flash, dazzling, loud, visually striking. But who lit the fuse? What was the real motive? And is there a text that doesn't just describe what happened, but explains why it happened? That's where the Book of Jubilees comes in, not to replace Enoch, but to dig deeper. If Enoch is the flash of the explosion, then Jubilees is the silent coordinate system revealing the full internal collapse. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it was kept in silence. If the Book of Enoch is a vivid, emotional vision, then the Book of Jubilees is the quiet voice, deeper, weightier, and far more frightening. No thunder, no descriptions of dazzling heavenly realms, no romantic beauty, no cinematic magic. Jubilees is presented as a detailed record from an angel directly dictated to Moses during his 40 days on Mount Sinai, meaning this isn't a personal vision. This is a theological document by design. And because of that, Jubilees' account of the same event feels like touching the hard core of a truth that's been sugar-coated for far too long. In Jubilees, there is no watcher who loves. They are not portrayed as beings overwhelmed by emotion. They are high-intellect entities who chose to descend not to marry, but to intervene. They didn't just take wives, they made a pact, a secret treaty, an oath among themselves to break the covenant between God and man. They taught forbidden things, not out of kindness, but to control. They introduced metalwork, cosmetics, warfare, and divination, not to help, but to strip purity from humanity. And worse still, they did all this before mankind even understood what the covenant truly meant. The Book of Jubilees presents this narrative as part of a sacred historical timeline, where every event unfolds within an order established since Eden. The Watchers disrupted that order, not with noise, not with immediate bloodshed, but by distorting rhythm, by unsettling time, by blurring the appointed feasts, by severing the sacred Sabbath, and slowly by causing mankind to live outside the covenant while still believing they remained within it. And perhaps that is why Jubilees was never read aloud. It was not taught. It was not widely copied like Enoch, not because it lacked importance, but because it was too clear, too systematic, too accurate, so much so that it could not be easily dismissed, yet was too dangerous if acknowledged. While Enoch was preserved as an emotional account, Jubilees was pushed aside as if the world wasn't ready to hear what could no longer be denied. But if you read carefully, you'll see it doesn't merely tell a story, it deconstructs what was once wrapped in beautiful language. And perhaps the most terrifying thing is not the Nephilim, but the fact that we've lived for centuries unaware that we've been cut off from our original memory. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are not portrayed as evil beings from the start, but as divine entities, assigned to watch over and observe mankind, who succumbed to an all-too-earthly emotion, love. They didn't descend to wage war. They carried no weapons, harbored no clear intent of rebellion. They simply loved. That's how Enoch tells it. The Watchers beheld the beauty of human women, and their hearts were stirred. They craved closeness, intimacy, fleshly union, experiences that, as angels, they were never meant to have. And what draws the reader's sympathy is how they chose to act. One angel, Semjaza, knew this was forbidden, but he also knew he couldn't bear the consequences alone. So he gathered the other 199 Watchers and convinced them to make a shared oath. They didn't rush, they considered. They swore a curse-bound pledge to step together into the forbidden. There's something in this act that feels both tragic and relatable, like human beings who fall, not from malice, but from overwhelming passion, pleasure, and the aching desire to be loved, even knowing it is wrong. And so they acted. They took human women as wives. They passed down knowledge, and they bore hybrid children, Nephilim, giant, powerful, awe-inspiring yet unstable creatures. The world began to spiral. War, chaos, bloodshed, and the collapse of morality. A catastrophic chain of events that began from something deeply human. That's what makes the Book of Enoch so popular. It tells a divine story, but with emotions that feel close to home. It lets us see the Watchers not as demons, but as beings who loved, just in the wrong way, at the wrong time. And that makes their fall feel like an emotional tragedy, not a calculated betrayal. It is that softness that makes Enoch so easy to accept, easy to forgive, easy to remember. And so millions have come to believe this is the whole truth. But could such a devastating outcome truly come from mere emotional failure? Or was there another layer, colder, more structured, that Enoch didn't reveal? That is when another text must speak, and Jubilees is the missing piece that reveals the deeper motive left out of this story. If the Book of Enoch portrays the fall as an emotional slip, Then the Book of Jubilees unveils something far more frightening, a calculated betrayal, one that began in the holiest of places. In Jubilees, the Watchers do not act out of impulsive emotion. They are not seduced, not misled by beauty. They make a deliberate, reasoned choice, a decision to disrupt the covenant order established since Eden. And for that reason, the fall in Jubilees is not a love story gone wrong, but a spiritual defiance, a deliberate rebellion against the sacred foundation of humanity. Jubilees reveals that these angels swore an oath together, not to love, but to teach mankind what they were not yet permitted to know. Not all knowledge is a blessing, not all wisdom leads to freedom. In the covenant system, revelation comes with timing, with proper recipients, through sacred order. But the Watchers, in the view of Jubilees, introduced forbidden knowledge at the wrong time to those who were not ready. Metallurgy, warfare, sorcery, cosmetics, divination, manipulative medicine, things not inherently evil, but when taught wrongly, disoriented mankind and severed them from their sacred rhythm. And the danger wasn't just in the acts. The deepest threat was the disruption of order. The Watchers broke the sacred time rhythm, the 364-day year, 52 weeks, 4 91-day seasons, a cycle established by God on the fourth day, when light and heavenly bodies were created. By teaching incorrect days for feasts, by throwing off the divine calendar, they did more than share knowledge. They introduced a silent but deadly error into human history. People thought they were keeping the holy days, but they were off. They thought they were within the covenant, but had fallen out of sync with the divine breath of the universe. Jubilees tells this not with thunderous sermons, but with silent, precise, unemotional prose, like an angel recording a cosmic report. And that is what makes it chilling, because once you know, you cannot go back to believing this was merely a romantic mistake. This is a war of awareness, where the enemy didn't destroy, but altered what seemed smallest, time. And from that, the entire soul system began to slip. No blood was shed, but the covenant was torn apart in silence. In the Book of Jubilees, the fall of the Watchers bears no trace of emotional tragedy, nor does it appear as isolated acts of wandering angels. It is a coordinated rebellion, a collective oath meticulously planned like a secret society where each supernatural being knew exactly what they were doing, fully aware that it defied the divine order established before creation itself. They didn't merely fall in love, they made a vow, a dreadful vow, binding immortal beings into an unholy covenant, to abandon their heavenly posts, to interfere with the human realm, to pass down secrets meant only for heaven. They didn't act alone. They didn't fall because they were weak. They agreed, they organized, they executed, as a shadow council, systematically overturning the covenant. And what they passed down was not terrifying black magic, but things that seemed beautiful. They taught metalwork, but for forging weapons. They taught cosmetics, but to strip people of inner beauty. They taught astronomy, not to connect with God, but for astrology, manipulation, and disordered time. They taught healing, but also the making of poisons. They brought sacred gifts, twisted them, and severed them from their meaning. And so, what was once a grace became destruction. In the sacred system of Jubilees, every knowledge is tied to timing, to the right person, to holy purpose. To teach it to the wrong person at the wrong time is to violate the covenant, and that is the deepest crime the Watchers committed. They didn't merely teach, they distorted. They made mankind believe they were becoming like the gods, while actually being cut off from the rhythm of the covenant. Instead of living in a divinely timed world, they became trapped in false cycles, where feasts were off date, blood was shed outside the proper rites, and all that was sacred was hollowed out from within. The most terrifying feeling in reading Jubilees is not the image of the Nephilim giants, but the cold silence of a logical conspiracy. No emotion, no uprising, just a series of precise acts designed to destroy sacred order from within. And because it was sealed with an oath, it cannot be undone easily, not by blood, but by restoring memory of what was once true before it was replaced with an off-rhythm copy. There is a profound difference between an individual falling from emotion and a collective planning betrayal. It's not only a difference in scale, but in nature. In the Book of Enoch, the fall of the Watchers is portrayed as a tragic chain of emotional choices. They saw beauty, felt moved, were drawn in, and step by step crossed the line. Sin began as a heartfelt response, like a second Adam, an angel innocent before the allure of the forbidden. That made the story relatable, understandable, forgivable. But in the Book of Jubilees, the entire theological framework shifts. No longer is it a forbidden love story. There is no fleeting weakness, no tearful twist. Here, the Watchers are powerful, fully aware beings who act according to a specific plan with a clear goal to dismantle the sacred order from within. They knew their actions violated the divine will. They did not act alone. They were not swept away. They entered into a covenant, and that changes their fall from a misstep to rebellion. From this perspective, Enoch becomes a mythical narrative, rich in emotion but limited to the surface, while Jubilees, with its quiet tone and slow pace, exposes a campaign to destroy the covenant unfolding at the very heart of the universe's sacred structure. It's not loud, not chaotic, but constant and devastating. This betrayal plays out in seemingly harmless details. A knowledge revealed too soon, a ritual done on the wrong day, a calendar shifted out of sync, and from there, the world drifts out of divine orbit without even realizing it. Comparing the two accounts, we see Enoch as a mirror of emotion for the reader, evoking empathy, but also making it easy to overlook the theological gravity of the event. Meanwhile, Jubilees does not allow such leniency. It demands the reader face a harsh truth. What was broken was not emotion, but the foundation of a soul order. And those who did it were not lost angels, but systematic, strategic covenant breakers. And that completely reshapes how we understand the origin of chaos, not just in Scripture, but in the world we live in today. Among all the texts considered apocryphal or outside the biblical canon, the Book of Jubilees stands out with a unique and weighty distinction. It does not begin with a dream, it is not written by a prophet in a trance, and it is not born from mythic inspiration. Jubilees claims to have been dictated by an angel directly to Moses on Mount Sinai at the very moment he received the law. It is not an ancient myth gathered from folklore, nor a personal vision like that of Enoch. It is a formal record, orderly, structured, and most disturbingly, theologically intentional. In Jubilees, there are no surreal images of heavens folding into radiant corridors or distant planets visited like a cosmic voyage. Instead, the reader is guided through each Jubilee, each 49-year cycle, with near mathematical precision. 364 days per year. 4 seasons, each with 91 days. Each cycle marked by feasts, laws, behaviors, and even memory. This is not a story for dinner conversations. It is a manual for operating the world according to the rhythm of the covenant. Jubilees recounts everything from the beginning. The first Sabbath kept by Adam, Abel's inaugural sacrificial ritual, Noah's observance of laws on clean and unclean animals, and Abraham not just believing but teaching the appointed feasts to his children before any command was etched in stone. This makes it impossible to dismiss Jubilees as mere religious fiction or supplemental narrative. For if its account is accurate, then Jubilees not only aligns with the spirit of the Torah, it precedes it, undergirds it. No mythology offers such detail. No prophetic book lays out a system of time, rituals, laws, and sacred calendars with such defined structure. Because of this, Jubilees does not dazzle with wonder, but provokes solemn reverence, compelling the reader to turn each page carefully, as if reading a parallel version of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, yet from a divine source not commonly acknowledged. If Enoch draws readers into mystery, Jubilees immerses them in a system so precise it feels suffocating. And that, not adventure, is what makes this book dangerous to anyone seeking to control faith. Because if Moses received not just the law, but also a forgotten memory, then what else is missing from the Bible we hold today? And if the covenant was restored at Sinai through the writing of an angel, why then have so many labored to keep it in silence for over 2 millennia? The Book of Enoch is mesmerizing. It transports readers into the supernatural world of the Watchers, the Nephilim, radiant heavens, and divine judgment. But within its stormy narrative lie unanswered questions. Why did humanity grow numb? Why did the feasts lose their sanctity? Why did mankind still stray even after the flood? And most importantly, what exactly was broken in that rebellion, besides bodies and blood? It is here that the Book of Jubilees enters, not with loud warning, but with chilling precision. What Enoch left open, Jubilees quietly documents, not through metaphor, but through calendar, not through symbols, but through system, not through legend, but through time. Jubilees details each 49-year cycle, each 364-day year, each 91-day season, each 7-day week, all established since creation. The 4th day, when light and heavenly bodies were formed, was set as the beginning of the week. This is not just technical detail. It is the foundation of every ritual, every feast, every vow kept in sacred rhythm. Only here does the reader begin to grasp. The destruction Enoch described, Nephilim ravaging, angels bound, was merely the visible tip of the iceberg. Jubilees uncovers the submerged mass, time thrown off course, feasts held on the wrong days, the covenant unobserved at its appointed times, prayers out of season, sacred things performed on days that did not belong to them, turning what was meant to connect humanity to God into hollow ceremonies without soul. In Enoch, the reader is moved by an angelic tragedy. In Jubilees, they are forced to ask a more sobering question. Are we truly living in alignment with divine order? Not because we sin, but because we are out of sync. And if we are, could it be that everything we call worship is actually offered to a God who is not present on that day? Jubilees does not negate Enoch. It simply goes deeper, more silently, but also more completely. It adds no new story. It emphasizes what has been forgotten, the memory of sacred time. And because of this, it is not merely a book, it is a restoration of the heartbeat of the covenant. Not loud, not dramatic, just perfectly rhythmic, and reserved for those patient enough to listen to sacred precision, season by season, day by day, feast by feast. While many ancient texts describe events through metaphor, dreams, or prophecy, the Book of Jubilees does something different. It records like a meticulous observer, as a guardian of the covenant's memory. Not fragments of feeling or stories meant to stir, but a working system, a map of time, a synchronized rhythm between the divine realm and humanity. From the creation of the cosmos to every Sabbath, every feast, all are set to a divine tempo. 364 days divided into 52 weeks, each season 91 days, and always beginning on the fourth day, the day the stars and sun were made. No other ancient text drills into this level of detail, not because Jubilees is overly scientific, but because it understands what we've forgotten. The sacred does not live in vague emotion, but in order. Astronomy in Jubilees is not for predicting harvests or crafting horoscopes. It is the anchor that reveals exactly when the Sabbath begins, when Passover must be kept, when humanity should pause and remember its origin. The order of the cosmos is not a philosophical idea, but the foundation for morality, ritual, and the presence of the covenant in daily life. Jubilees says, Adam kept the Sabbath. Noah discerned the clean from the unclean. Abraham taught the seasonal festivals to his household. These are not innovations of Moses, nor were they inventions by post-exilic Jews. They are memories from the beginning, lost when humanity fell out of rhythm, and now recorded by an angel, not to predict, but to restore. That is why this book is not a story. It is a journal, not of a person, but of the covenant. A history accurate to the day, but also a vision of sacred order. In an age where calendars bend to politics, feasts are shaped by culture, and life's rhythm is ruled by work, Jubilees raises a question. If we live out of sync with the cosmos, could we also be out of sync with the covenant without realizing it? Could the emptiness in ritual, the boredom in holy seasons, not be a matter of weak faith, but of forgotten rhythm? And could it be that the sacred has not vanished, but simply didn't arrive on the wrong day? The Book of Jubilees does not ask you to believe in the mystical. It only asks you to pay attention to each day, each week, each season, because the sacred does not live in the magical, but in order, in a cycle that the covenant has already set and is still waiting for someone to remember. For too long, the image of the Watchers has been contained within a tragic tale, powerful angels fallen through the force of love, a romanticized rebellion, turning their actions into something sympathetic, as if all of it stemmed from a single emotional mistake. But if you read the Book of Jubilees carefully, you'll uncover a different truth, colder, clearer, and far more unsettling. The Watchers were not beings who fell from weakness. They were entities who deliberately shattered sacred order, covenant breakers by oath. Jubilees does not portray them as victims of desire. It exposes an organized plan, a collective vow, a mutual agreement to do what was forbidden. They didn't merely love the wrong ones, they intentionally taught forbidden knowledge, magic, warfare, cosmetics, metallurgy, divination. Each of these realms, once part of divine knowledge, was handed down at the wrong time to a humanity unready in spirit. And the consequence was not merely the birth of the Nephilim, it was the collapse of Eden's entire structure. The greatest danger they unleashed was not bloodshed, it was forgetfulness, forgetting how to distinguish holy days, forgetting sacred times, forgetting Sabbath, forgetting the covenant. When feasts are celebrated on the wrong day, when rituals are misaligned with the seasons, when souls no longer live in sacred rhythm, then the covenant, though still spoken by mouth, has already vanished from the heart. And this is the true nature of the Watchers, not lost beings, but creators of a false path for all mankind. In Jubilees, they are called covenant breakers, not because they shattered one law, but because they dismantled the foundation of the entire sacred system: time, ritual, morality, and memory. They are not just violators, they are architects of a distorted order, and their consequences are not sealed in the past, they are still unfolding. Because as long as humanity lives out of sync, celebrates out of season, forgets the sacred cycles, the legacy of the Watchers endures, not through form, but through forgetfulness, not through power, but through persistent misalignment. And that, according to Jubilees, is the ultimate betrayal of the covenant. In the imagination of many, the Nephilim are giant beings, part human, part angel, symbols of an unnatural fusion between heaven and earth. Videos often depict them as fierce, towering, chaotic, but through the lens of Jubilees, something more terrifying emerges. The Nephilim are not just a product, they are a consequence. They are not the cause of disorder, but the sign that the world had already fallen out of rhythm long before they appeared. Jubilees reveals a slow but certain process of decay. It begins with forgetting the holy days, then forgetting the Sabbath, then losing the distinction between clean and unclean. Then, eventually, people no longer know when to offer sacrifices, when to pause, when to remember what is sacred. And it is in that spiritual void that the Nephilim appear, not as some random anomaly, but as the inevitable result of a system that has rotted at its root. They are not merely massive beings, they are the embodiment of a collective soul that has lost its way. They are born from bodies that no longer uphold the law, from spirits no longer in sync with sacred rhythm, from communities that no longer remember the covenant. In Jubilees, their appearance is an alarm, not about what is strange, but about what was once right, but now forgotten. They do not come to destroy, they are the sign that destruction already happened. And when you read those descriptions again, you begin to see the Nephilim are no longer ancient legend. They are the image of a modern world where people live without cycles, without rest, without ritual, where everything is rationalized, instrumentalized, commercialized, even the sacred. And when the sacred is replaced by convenience, when the covenant is replaced by habit, when the Sabbath becomes just a weekend, then the Nephilim no longer need to be born. They are already there, in the way we live. Jubilees does not tell this story to frighten. It tells it to remind, look at the emergence of the Nephilim, not to analyze their DNA, but to measure the heartbeat of the human soul. If something in today's world makes you feel anxious, lost, or empty, perhaps it's not your fault. Perhaps it is a warning. The order is off, and the Nephilim, though no longer giants, are still a sign of a world that has forgotten the covenant. In many books and legends, Enoch is known as the one who was taken, one of only 2 figures in all of Scripture who did not die an ordinary death. In the Book of Enoch, he becomes a traveler through the heavenly realms, meeting angels, exploring the cosmos, witnessing punishment and glory. These images are vivid, deeply imaginative. But in the Book of Jubilees, we meet a very different Enoch, not a traveler, but a guardian. Not one chosen to go far, but one who remembered clearly what had been forgotten. Jubilees doesn't portray Enoch flying through the heavens. Instead, it records a singular truth. He was the first to keep the law. Not Moses, not Abraham, but Enoch. The man who lived in an age of moral darkness, when the Watchers had sown disorder on the earth, when humanity had begun to forget the covenant, to fall out of sacred rhythm, to disrupt divine cycles. In that time, he did not respond with shouts or retreat into isolation. He kept the law, quietly, steadily, at the appointed times. He lived by the sacred calendar, 364 days. He kept the Sabbath. He offered sacrifices in their proper seasons. He taught his children how to discern clean from unclean. He did not invent anything new. He simply recorded and preserved. And that is why he was taken, not as a reward, not to explore the stars, but to be spared from the coming degeneration, to be kept from assimilation into a world that was forgetting, to preserve the memory of the sacred, like a seed placed in a clay jar, waiting for another season. Jubilees shows that Enoch's departure was not a reward, but a preservation strategy, a theological intervention, a salvaging of memory. Because if he had remained, if he had witnessed more of the forgetting, more of the deviation, more of the distortion of the covenant, perhaps even he would have been swept away. So he was held back, not in the heavens, but in the memory of the covenant. He is not a symbol of mystery. He is a model of faithfulness. If you've ever felt like you're living in a world that no longer remembers what is sacred, that no longer knows when it's truly time to rest, to feast, to be silent, then maybe you can understand why Enoch was taken, not because he knew more, but because he remembered well. And sometimes, as Jubilees reminds us, the one who is chosen is not the strongest, not the most visionary, but the last one left who keeps the rhythm in the midst of chaos. And if you still remember, perhaps you too carry a mission like his. When we think of the law, most of us picture Sinai, Moses, the tablets inscribed with commands, the moment when a nation received its sacred constitution. But what if all of that was not the beginning? What if Sinai was not the starting point, but a reminder? The Book of Jubilees, an ancient text once removed from Scripture, makes a bold claim. Moses was not the first to keep the law. In fact, he was not the first to know the law. He was simply the one reminded of it, amid a stream of memory that had been broken. According to Jubilees, from the moment humanity was created, the law already existed. Adam kept the Sabbath, not because anyone taught him, but because it was the rhythm of the universe. The seventh day, the day God rested, became the fundamental model for all human rest. Abel, Adam's son, did not offer sacrifices randomly. His offering was given at the appointed time. Noah, post-flood, was not merely a shipbuilder. He knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. He offered sacrifices with what was permitted. And Abraham, the patriarch revered by the world's three major religions, Jubilees says he kept every feast, knew the heavenly cycles, and taught the law to his children. He did not wait for Sinai because he lived in the memory of Eden. If this is true, then our entire theological framework of the law must be reconsidered. The law was not a gift dropped down suddenly. It was a current of memory, kept, repeated, lived, then forgotten, and finally recorded again by Moses. What Moses did was not to originate, but to restore. What he etched in stone was not something new, but an echo of Eden. And that does not diminish him. It exalts him as the one who gathered the broken pieces of a sacred memory dissolving in time. Jubilees does not obscure Moses, but it clarifies that the covenant was never a one-time bestowal, but a promise preserved across generations. When people remember, the law lives. When people keep the feast, the day, the rhythm, the covenant remains. And when all seems lost, this book appears to say, the law never died. It only waits to be remembered. And if you have ever thought the covenant is something distant, reserved for great saints, then Jubilees whispers another truth. Maybe you just need to begin by keeping one day right, one season right, one rhythm right. You do not start the law, you simply remember it. What if everything you hold sacred is being kept on the wrong day? What if you believe, offer, celebrate with full sincerity, but at a time misaligned with the appointed rhythm of the covenant? This is not a peripheral question of academic theology. This is a soul-shaking reminder. Because according to Jubilees, time is not just a background, it is the structure of the soul. And if the 364-day calendar is true, then perhaps the entire ritual system we now follow is running on a misaligned cycle. In Jubilees, time is the very first order established after light. 364 days, 52 weeks, 4 seasons, each with 91 days. Every motion of heaven, the sun, the moon, the stars, moves to this rhythm. And the midpoint of the fourth day, Wednesday, is the day light was created. From that moment, every feast, every holy season, every sacrifice was appointed. Not randomly, not flexibly, not subjectively, but with precision, with order, with sacred timing. And this is not a technical detail, it is the foundation of the covenant. So what if you observe the Sabbath, but it doesn't fall on the day the covenant intended? What if you celebrate Passover, but miss the actual cycle? What if you fast, pray, offer sacrifice, but in the wrong season, the wrong week, the wrong appointed time? Does what you keep still remain holy, not because you lack faith, but because you are operating on the wrong calendar? And in Jubilees, what makes the watchers guilty is not just teaching forbidden knowledge, but distorting the liturgical cycle. They made people forget the days, misplace the weeks, lose the rhythm, and from that the sacred becomes deformed, not erased, but mistimed. And if that is true, then the most frightening reality is not blatant sin, but sincere devotion offered on the wrong day, blood spilled on a day that holds no sacred weight. Fasting in a season that is not quiet, prayers offered in a time not yet opened, and when the sacred is mistimed, the soul does not connect at the right moment. The bond is not severed, but weak, like a signal off frequency, and you may think you are aligned, but in truth, you are drifting. Jubilees doesn't merely give you a calendar, it gives you a bell, gentle but deep, not to force you to fix everything at once, but to plant a question, one that keeps you awake at night. Is what I'm keeping still in sync? Because the covenant is not on the page, it's in the rhythm of life. And if you're offbeat, maybe it's time to pause, not to turn back, but to listen again to the original rhythm, the rhythm that began with light, the rhythm of the sacred that is still waiting for its time to return in your own life. Jubilees is one of the books excluded from the Bible, not because it was wrong, but because it was right too early. When a sacred text appears that upends every familiar theological structure, it not only unsettles doctrine, but touches something even more sensitive: authority. Jubilees does not tell new stories, it retells on a timeline few dare to acknowledge. On that timeline, the law does not begin at Sinai, and Moses is not the first to keep it. This doesn't just shake the belief systems built over centuries, it forces the gatekeepers of doctrine to face the question, what is our role if this already existed long before us? Jubilees is not prophetic in the traditional sense. There are no visions, no obscure symbols. It is the meticulous transcription of an angel to Moses on Mount Sinai. But that is precisely what makes it dangerous. Because if an angel truly gave Moses a different calendar, a different cycle, a different covenant before the law itself, then the entire Moses-centric theology begins to tremble. And if Jubilees is telling the truth, then those who shaped the canon were not the originators, but merely the late scribes. The reason the Book of Jubilees was excluded from the canon was never that it led believers astray. It did not promote idolatry. It did not distort the faith. On the contrary, it was too orthodox, too structured, too complete, and far too early. It arrived before the theological system was ready to acknowledge it. And like every truth that comes before its time, it wasn't condemned. It was quietly set aside, like a messenger who arrives early to a meeting, only to be asked to wait outside. But the danger of Jubilees is this: it didn't disappear. It endured quietly within the Ethiopian Bible. It was hand-copied, passed on through small communities, discovered in the Qumran caves, like a subtle reminder that there may have been a deeper, broader, firmer order, pushed aside not for error, but for inconvenience to institutional power. This doesn't make Jubilees wrong. It only makes it difficult to accept, because if someone picks it up and reads it with open eyes, they'll no longer see Moses as the first. They'll see Adam keeping the Sabbath, Noah distinguishing between clean and unclean, Abraham offering sacrifices in their proper seasons. And they'll realize they're not learning a new religion. They're remembering an old covenant, a sacred memory that came too early. Unlike Enoch, a book rich in visions, metaphors, and symbols, Jubilees presents itself as a direct, concrete, divinely originated document, dictated by an angel of the Lord to Moses on Mount Sinai. This not only makes it unique among the so-called banned books, it forces us to re-evaluate its place in the theological framework. For if a heavenly being truly guided Moses to record the covenant's order that existed long before his life, then Moses was not the originator of the law, but the one entrusted to restore what had been lost. And if that is accepted, it overturns an entire authority structure built on the premise that Moses was the beginning. We are used to seeing Moses as the first bearer of the law, the singular mediator of the covenant. But Jubilees tells a different story. It says that when Moses stood on Sinai, he didn't just receive tablets, he was taught the entire cycle of time, of rituals, of laws that had existed since Adam, lived by Noah, preserved by Abraham. Moses, according to this book, did not begin sacred history. He rewrote the memory that had been erased. And that is why Jubilees is a dangerous book. Not because it is heretical, but because it is too orthodox. So orthodox, it challenges the theological monopoly of those who shaped the canon. It does what few books dare to do. It shifts the center of theology away from institutions and back to memory. A memory that cannot be controlled, not held in the hands of any council or synod, but kept alive by those brave enough to remember. The angels, according to Jubilees, did not choose to deliver this message to the crowd. They chose one man, Moses, not because he was great, but because he was willing to listen, willing to record, willing to remain silent, and then pass on exactly what he had received. They did not give power, they gave memory, not to control, but to preserve. That is also why this book was never made canonical, because it does not serve a ruling structure, but restores a memory structure. And memory, when written not through power, but through faithfulness, will always make those in power uncomfortable. But that discomfort may also be the clearest evidence that Jubilees might have spoken true, and that the angels chose the right man. Jubilees never claimed to be an esoteric book. It does not hide in mystical rites. It does not build pagan idols. It does not call for worship of foreign forces. It does one thing only. It reminds us of what once was, things so ancient, so familiar, that they've been dismissed as too ordinary to preserve. But that very familiarity is what led to its quiet removal, not because it was dangerous like heresy, but because it was too close to truth and too hard to control. This book doesn't teach summoning, it doesn't promise wealth or supernatural power. It speaks of time, but true time, of festivals, but the original ones. It speaks of the Sabbath, of seasons, of what is clean and unclean, not as a harsh legal code, but as a current of memory flowing quietly from Eden. What Jubilees does is restore that order so that humanity won't lose rhythm, won't drift from the covenant. So if you were expecting a book that's shocking, subversive, or revolutionary, Jubilees may disappoint. It is not strange, it is deeply familiar. So familiar that you may have heard it before: Adam keeping the day of rest, Noah discerning what may be eaten, Abraham observing spring festivals. And because it feels so familiar, it is not seen as a discovery, but a repetition. But in that repetition lies something sacred, the revival of a forgotten memory. Jubilees was never condemned by the early church. They did not call it false. They simply did not mention it. They didn't copy it, didn't preach from it, didn't pass it down. And that silence, more effective than any debate, pushed Jubilees out of religious memory. But true memory does not die. It only sleeps. It waits for a generation, not seeking novelty, but yearning for what was lost. Not needing to believe something new, just willing to remember the old. And if you are still reading, perhaps you are part of that memory. Not to hold some exclusive belief, but to bear witness, some things were not forbidden, just forgotten. And the most frightening fate is not opposition, but oblivion. You do not need to be a scholar or theologian to enter this dialogue with Scripture and what was once left out. You don't need to master every theological framework or historical argument to sense something very real. There is something in you that already knew. A strange familiarity when you hear of the 364-day calendar. A silent shiver when you learn Adam once kept Sabbath. A distant echo when you read of angels who broke the covenant, not because of misplaced love, but because of holy rebellion. Jubilees does not require analysis. It only asks for your attention. And if in some quiet moment, when you hear again of a forgotten feast, a broken cycle, an ancient name left behind, and your heart goes still, then maybe you are not just a reader. Maybe you are the last one who still remembers, not remembering through intellect, but through soul, not remembering to debate, but to preserve what an entire generation has lost. That does not make you a preacher. It makes you a witness. And in an age where the sacred is being replaced by efficiency, by arguments, by systems, it is this memory, quiet, persistent, that may be the only thing left holding the covenant from being fully erased. Maybe you don't need to do anything grand, just don't forget. And if you don't forget, then the memory never died. It is coming back to life through you. What you've just seen is not a theological argument. It's not about convincing anyone that one book is more valid than another. This is not a contest of right or wrong. It is a moment of remembrance, a space where memory is not debated, but reawakened. Because if the covenant is still alive, it is not alive in theory. It is alive in how you keep a feast, even if no one tells you to. It is alive in your choice to pause on a Saturday afternoon, not because you are tired, but because it is sacred. It is alive in the way you look at your children and retell the first story, not with sermons, but with a meal, a blessing, a moment of stillness. Perhaps no one will understand why you choose to live just a little differently, why you don't run with the rush of this world. But you don't need to explain. You're not living to argue, you're living to preserve. And that alone, is the strongest proof that the covenant was never lost. It's just been waiting for someone to remember and keep it, not with words, but with life. If that person is you, then nothing more needs to be said. The covenant has begun to live again in you. You don't need to change the world. You don't need to preach. You don't even need to declare anything. You can simply begin with one small, sacred thing. A real day of rest, not out of fatigue, but out of remembrance. A meal begun with thanksgiving, not for custom, but because something in you knows this is the time. A holy season kept, not from tradition, but because deep in your heart, a rhythm wants to match again with the original beat. Jubilees doesn't ask you to become a prophet, it simply hands you the map. A sacred calendar with markers, light, cycles, feasts, covenant. And if you begin to live again by that rhythm, with no recognition, no permission, then the sacred will return, not loudly, but surely, because the covenant, from the beginning, never needed the world's approval. It only needed someone to remember, to keep, to pass on. Perhaps you are the first piece in the restoration of that entire map. A map not drawn in ink, but in life. Not opened by logic, but by the slow steps of someone willing to return to the rhythm humanity once lost. And this time, if you begin, it may never be forgotten again. If you've made it to the end of this video, perhaps it's because something sacred in you has never gone out. And if that's true, please don't leave in silence. Leave a comment, not just as feedback, but as testimony. A line you write may be the thread that helps someone else remember. A detail that silenced you may awaken someone who forgot. A question you carry may be the one that leads another home. Memory doesn't live in books. It lives in community, in those who dare to retell. Dare to ask, dare to reconnect what's been broken. And if you've felt something stir on this journey, maybe you are the one being called to preserve what is vanishing, not with a sermon, but with a sentence, a story, a presence. Don't let this memory vanish again just because no one spoke it aloud. You don't have to explain it. Just be real. Just tell it. And sometimes all it takes is one phrase. I still remember. Because sometimes that alone is enough to awaken a part of the covenant again in a world still asleep. Amen.